And so now we are going to move on to our program. And this morning we are taking a closer look at Reform 2.0. This is a Republican initiative that was spearheaded this past August. And I think you'll be starting to hear more about it. I know I drove in this morning listening to NPR and heard a story on it this morning, which was very timely for me. So that was helpful. But so that you're starting to hear a lot more about this. It certainly is going to impact a lot of the legislation that we see in the 2012 legislative session. And so let me just read to you a blurb that came out of a Capitol publication called Session Daily, what it had to say about Reform 2.0 and the announcement last August. Nearly a month after the legislature and Governor Mark Dayton agreed on a budget plan to end the state government shutdown, Republican leaders announced an effort to hear from Minnesotans about how state government should be reformed. In releasing Reform 2.0, House Speaker Kurt Zellers said elected officials need to work on reforming how government works because the status quo is not sustainable. The quote here is, "Our state's economic climate and fiscal future rely on the reforms we're able to make today." In a statement, House Minority Leader Paul Thiessen from Minneapolis said the proposal is more of the giveaways to corporate special interests. The quote in the article from Representative Paul Thiessen was, "Minnesota state government is one of the most efficient governments in the nation, but we can never rest on our laurels. We will succeed if we recognize no party has the corner on good reform ideas. I am hopeful about enacting smart reform in 2012 if there is a commitment to work across party lines and to make sure that the voice that is heard the loudest in St. Paul is the voice of the people." So we are very excited this morning to have two TwinWest area legislators with us. We have Republican House Speaker Kurt Zellers and DFL State Representative Ryan Winkler. They're going to share with us their perspectives on government reform and what this means to the business community. And while we expect that they will have some differing opinions on this, we also are very interested in hearing, as we've heard many of our legislators reference this morning, where they have commonality, where they agree on these issues, and where we can hopefully move things forward quickly. So let me go ahead and introduce them. First, I'm going to introduce House Speaker Kurt Zellers. Kurt Zellers represents House District 32B, which encompasses Maple Grove and Osseo. He was first elected in a 2003 special election, replacing Rich Stanek, who joined the Plenty administration at that time. He served as Assistant Majority Leader in the House from 2005 to 2006, and as Assistant Minority Leader from 2007 to 2009. Elected by his peers in the Minnesota House, Zellers was confirmed as Speaker on January 4th, 2011. His legislative accomplishments include co-authoring legislation which realized the long-time pursuit to build a hospital in Maple Grove. That hospital did open in December of 2009. In 2006, he was also the chief author of House File 1, greatly strengthening Minnesota's sex offender laws. Zellers previously worked in public affairs and communications for more than a decade, primarily in the upper Midwest. His time includes work for Twin Cities advertising and public relations firms. He's conducted media training, speech coaching, and crisis communication for all levels and aspects of the public and private sectors, from United States Senate debates to speechwriter for Fortune 500 CEOs. Speaker Zellers was born and raised in North Dakota and attended the University of North Dakota, where he received his BA in political science. He lives in Maple Grove with his wife Kim and their 2 children. So I welcome House Speaker Zellers. We also are very happy to have with us this morning Representative Ryan Winkler. Ryan Winkler represents St. Louis Park and Golden Valley in the Minnesota House of Representatives. He was first elected in 2006. He is a Democrat in his 3rd term and serves on the State Government Finance Committee, the Government Operations Committee, and the Legacy Division. His priorities in the legislature are promoting access to capital for new businesses, enhancing the environment for technology-based job creation, and improving state government operations. Currently, Winkler is Associate Counsel at BioThera, a Twin Cities biotechnology company. Previously, he was General Counsel at NASA Solutions, a Minneapolis software company, and has focused his career on technology-based startup and emerging businesses. He's a Bemidji native, was a history major at Harvard College, and is a graduate of the University of Minnesota Law School. He lives in Golden Valley with his wife Jenny and their 3 boys. Welcome very much, Representative. I would just like, and I'm sure they will both refer to it, but when you came in this morning on your seats, you had some handouts. The first was a 1-page handout that talked about Reform 2.0 and highlighted some of the social media aspects of it. Really getting with the times there. That's fabulous. And then the other is a series of pages clipped together, and Representative Winkler had that passed out. So I'm sure they will both reference that, but I wanted you to know where those came from. And so why don't we just go ahead. We're going to do this a little informally here. You both are very familiar with the TwinWest way, so we're going to give you a little free rein, but if I need to, I'll throw out a yellow card and pull you back. At a soccer game last night, sectionals go Egan. Sorry, it's not the West. Sorry, it's not TwinWest territory, but so why don't we start a little bit. Speaker Sellers, why don't you kind of kick us off, talk to us a little bit about maybe where this idea for Reform 2.0 came from, and then what is happening in that right now. So just give us some context and background on this.
Sure, and oh, wow. Very good, Swank Communications, excellent product. And thank you also for the opportunity, not only for Ryan and I to be here, but for to address the TwinWest. This is an organization that having the opportunity to travel around the state, just so you know, and it's not just because Danette's a fabulous hostess or Toastmaster, but this is a group, and traveling around a lot of chambers is a very interactive chamber, and you should be very proud of the attendance, the questioning. I mean, this is probably one of the best that I've been to in the state, and I promise I don't say that at every chamber I go and speak to. The idea behind Reform 2.0 was not just to sit back and wait for someone to come into government and say, this is failing, this is costing us too much money, this has been a great idea 20 years ago, but it's served its usefulness. And to Senator Rest's point, exactly, we don't have to create a new law. That was the whole idea, is to look at some of the things that are already on the books that either aren't working, haven't been working, or need to be improved upon to update with technology. From our perspective, there's a number of things out there, and just to be very clear, we're not Republicans that should go out and say, we'll just take all of government down. We don't need any more government. That's a bad idea. We're just looking for government to work with the people and to work for the people instead of the other way around, which is traditionally the way we, unfortunately, in Minnesota have had to survive as a business owner for a number of years, where we come in, you have a permit, you have another permit, you have a state one, you have a local one, you have maybe a federal government. We're looking at it from a perspective of what can we do to keep not only Minnesota businesses competitive, but when they're looking at where their surrounding states are, where they're doing business, if we are different in any way, not to say that we're going to lower standards, but if we can equalize those standards so that when those Minnesota business owners come home, they can look at those processes here and say, well, it's just like it was in Wisconsin or in Iowa, and it doesn't take 6 months longer or 6 weeks longer, or it doesn't cost an extra $10,000 compared to the $1,000 or $500 we paid for that permit. Now, that is not exciting government stuff. It is not going to show up on the front page of the Star Tribune. It's not going to be in the lead story on the 10 o'clock news. But it's a little thing, and there's no one silver bullet. I will be the first one to admit that we undo this regulation or we lower this cost in government structure. All of a sudden, everyone in this room as a business owner is going to say, oh, thank God, now I'm going to go out there and start adding jobs or spending capital or building a new building. There is no one thing, but there are a number of little things. And what Reform 2.0 also focuses on is going out and asking not just local governments, not just school districts or county commissioners, but business owners as well. Looking at that whole spectrum to say, what is it that we've done, or what is it that you've always said, this is just a worthless procedure, worthless permitting process. You know, we do this for the state, and then the feds come in, and then the county. You know, can't all of you at government look at it and say, okay, this is the one permit that we need to do. We've already performed the test. It should be good for you, should be good for you, and should be good for the locals as well. So that's, and the only way you're going to actually get that is to go out and listen to people. We've had a number of these hearings or listening sessions all around the state. We're going to continue to do them and then put into practice things that people back home have looked at and said, this is what we think is a good idea, and then hopefully working with the governor again, just like we did with House File 1, with teacher licensure, with performance, or performance evaluation for teachers and principals. Look at these reforms, work with the governor, work with our Democrat colleagues, and hopefully pass them into law very early in session.
So, Representative Winkler, this morning, and I'm paraphrasing here, so I'm going to get it as close as I can, but there was a story in NPR this morning and about Reform 2.0, and Minority Leader Paul Thiessen commented that although he absolutely supports reform, was concerned that this effort was more tied in partisan politics and ideological, and is that kind of the position of the DFL on this, or was that, can you comment on?
Danette, I'm concerned that you thought I was just going to sit up here and agree all morning with the speaker, and your audience would be
I was not.
was going to be completely bored. So rest assured,
I just gave you a softball.
rest assured, I wasn't going to just agree with everything that's been said here this morning. A lot of you were here last week. When Professor Schultz was here, and he talked about the new normal in budget and politics in Minnesota. He talked about 2 state government shutdowns in 6 years, the inability of the state of Minnesota to deal with real financial problems that we've created. And his description was the new normal, and it was really about the ideological battles over taxes that have characterized state government in the last 10 years. And reform is important, reform is good, but reform, if we don't deal with our basic financial challenges, it really isn't going to get us very far. So Danette mentioned I'm a history major, and to me, in my experience at the legislature, the kind of warfare that we're engaged in over the budget and the issues of taxes is most like World War I. We're dug into trenches, and every once in a while, one of us launches an attack at the other, and the other one machine guns them down, and they go back the other direction. And we're just stuck with nothing but wreckage. So to me, the question this morning about Reform 2.0 is this an effort for us to get out, just walk in the middle ground, shake hands, and move forward together? Or is it just another can of mustard gas thrown from the Republican trench? And I think that's what we really need to tease out here today. But let's start with where we definitely agree. And in addition to agreeing that reform is important, I think where we can certainly agree is that the top priority for political leaders in Minnesota has to be jobs and prosperity for the state. That ultimately is our goal. We are trying to make the state prosperous. We're trying to make jobs grow here. We all agree on that. And I brought you some information. I'm going to kind of kill you with facts and statistics. But this is a slide deck from Tom Stinson and Tom Gillespie, who are the state economists and state demographers. I'm not going to go through it in detail. I'll just summarize it for you. And basically their point is Minnesota has been a successful state economically for 50 years, but the big challenges in front of us are a declining workforce because of aging and because of an education achievement gap, declining innovation because we are not doing the R&D work in Minnesota that we did decades ago that creates jobs. They talk about the state finances being in disarray and demographics making it difficult for us to make the investments in education, innovation, and workforce that will actually drive our economy. And the larger point I would make is that we have a middle-class jobs crisis in this country generally. Through decades of automation and globalization, it's increased our productivity, it's grown the total pie, but working middle-class jobs are in real decline, and this recession has killed off millions of them, and they're never coming back. So for me, the test of Reform 2.0, or any legislative effort that we undertake in the years ahead, does it help with middle-class jobs? Does it help develop our workforce? Does it help with innovation? Does it help close the education achievement gap? And the answer to Reform 2.0 on those questions right now is a big question mark. I don't know what it's going to do. Just would take a minute to talk about the state finances, because if we're going to do anything with reform, it ought to be to reform our state budget so that it's not in a perpetual budget deficit. And we certainly did not do that this year. There are 2 states in the country that borrow from school districts in order to balance their books. Those two states are California and Minnesota. California borrows 19% from school district budgets to balance the state books. Minnesota borrows 40% from school districts to balance our state books. This year, for the first time, we are borrowing money to cover our current operations. It's deficit spending, basically, is the ultimate solution to the budget this year. The next budget cycle shows a $2 to $5 billion deficit, $5 billion if you actually pay back those schools. And that's with the old economic forecast. The slowdown that we've seen this summer is actually going to drive that down further. So we're looking at another major multi-billion-dollar budget deficit. Our state finances are a complete mess, and we cannot possibly start to deal with our shortcomings on innovation, workforce, education, and so on without dealing with our finances and putting them on a sound footing. We have to do that first. And Reform 2.0 should be targeted at that right away. So that's why, I'm open-minded. I think there's a lot of things we can do together. But if you start with a constitutional amendment, the only substantive provision of Reform 2.0 that's been offered so far is a constitutional amendment requiring a supermajority of the legislature to raise revenue. Now, you might like taxes, you might not like taxes, you might think it should be a balanced approach, you might think it shouldn't. But if we have a financial mess in our state, does it make it easier to deal with if you make it almost impossible to raise revenue as part of the long-term solution? Or does that make us look more like the state of California with its financial chaos? So far, not so good on the fundamental requirements that we should use to test any kind of reform effort. There's this Reform 1.0 handout that came out, and there's a lot of good things in there. A lot of things that Republicans spearheaded that are going to move the state forward. Some of those things are things that Democrats or the governor also had started and worked on, but things that we could move forward on together. But
So
no.
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to ask a question, but just finish up. Go ahead.
I'll just finish up. It won't take me long. It only tells part of the story. And the other part of the story is that this legislative session was disastrous for a lot of parts of this state and for a middle-class jobs situation. So I think Reform 2.0 should focus first on restoring some soundness back to the state books. I have a constitutional amendment of my own that I offered during the special session, which says that you cannot borrow for operations. You cannot issue tobacco bonds or appropriation bonds in order to fund state government operations. I think that would actually be a step forward in making our state's books work. But there are a lot of other things we could do, Mr. Speaker. We could work on tax reform, payment reform in healthcare, workforce training. We could build transportation like the Southwest Corridor. We could work on priority-based budgeting. But the only way we're going to do that is if we come out of our trenches and actually try to shake hands and make this effort together. We have to make the legislature stop being the problem and actually come out and work and get the job done.
So, Speaker Sellers, let's go ahead and respond. There's a lot of things there that you may want to respond to.
Well, if that's the case, Ryan can leave the table.
I think we should have had two mics. I think that's right now what I'm saying.
That'd be dangerous.
But if you could, in that response, though, is maybe talk about what is the scope of Reform 2.0. So Representative Winkler, identified some real legitimate issues that we have right now with our finances. So respond how you like, but also if you could talk about the scope of this initiative.
Well, and Ryan's right, and I would prefer to focus on that and not have, the dirty bombs that we may throw mustard gas. He throws dirty bombs on the floor. I mean, it's his job. I get that. I was in the minority. That's the job of the minority caucus on the floor. But actually, Ryan and I, on a couple of different things, especially when it came to OET at the Capitol, when we were on state government finance, when roles were reversed, I was in the minority, they were in the majority. We agreed on it because you walk around the Capitol and there's 17 different technology centers with 17 different directors with 17 different fiefdoms. I mean, priorities in their budget areas. We wouldn't want to call anybody in IT having, no, there's no empires in IT in government anywhere. Any of you who've had to deal with IT in the room are now laughing. But from our perspective, the scope, and I will give Ryan a little bit of a hard time. If you want to know where priorities are, how you're going to fix government, here's a Republican solution. It's going out and asking you. Here's the Democrat solution. It's more government, adding on to government, government telling business, government telling local government what to do. We believe if you go out and ask folks, to your point, Danette, what it is that we're not doing well, but then ask also inside. We've asked the AFSCME and MAPE employees for their input. What is it that we, as a legislature, are asking you? And I don't care if you're a union or a non-union, a Democrat union member or a union Republican member or an independent member. If you see something every day in your job that makes absolutely no sense to you, come to us and tell us. It would help us, because every day, Ryan and I don't have time, shockingly, to walk from agency to agency and look into their procedures, their functions, their budgets, and say, oh, well, clearly you're doing this wrong. Ryan and I found that out. There's a mistake here. We need those reforms from the inside, not just from us at the Capitol saying, here's what we believe. So from our fundamental point, our focus is whatever isn't working now or whatever has been done in other states. The idea, to Ryan's point exactly, California should not be an example for us. We had some bills with car emissions dealing with the California a few years ago. We do not want to do what California is doing. However, there are some great reforms in Ohio, in Michigan, even in Iowa. No offense to the Iowa. Well,
even in Iowa.
there's no one from Iowa in the room. No, they've got oil. They've got a budget surplus. There's nothing. Everything, they pay cash for everything there, so we could only aspire to that. But when you go out and you listen to folks, not just business owners, but local governments, and we've had a number of great meetings with local government officials when it comes to mandate relief, saying, for years we've been waiting for this, and they quite frankly have been disappointed in the government because they've tried just to get to the Capitol, and then no one really wants to make that first leap. So that's our focus, and it's absolutely not partisan, because reforming government isn't going to get Ryan or I reelected or unelected. Reforming government will, however, make businesses in that local area think twice about relocating or their expansion being not here in Minnesota, but in Austin, Texas, or Tennessee, or South Carolina. And that's really what, again, it's back to Minnesota competitiveness, and it's not just about where the new plant is going to be. I've talked to a number of business owners that will tell you, and managers of a current either a manufacturing plant or a service plant that's in Minnesota, and because of the times we're in, they're competing with their colleagues in other states. So the plant and I won't say a state because I don't want Ryan to tweet it, and then that state will call me and say, what do you have against Tennessee? But some state in another part of the country has a factory there. That factory or that service center looks at their input costs, whether it's utilities, whether it's heat, electricity. They then look at their boss, the operations manager, and say, hey, you know what? Those guys in Minnesota are 20% more expensive. If you relocate that plant down here, we'll expand. Our costs for construction are a lot lower. We're going to be able to expand here. We'll be more productive, and oh, by the way, we're going to save you 15%, 20%. Maybe it's even 5%, but in these tough times, 5% on the bottom line, for those of you in the room who do run businesses, can absolutely make a difference of whether or not you keep the doors open or keep that extra shift on, or whether or not you're going to have to close or fire some people. So those kind of things happen every day, and you won't understand them, you won't get them unless you go out and listen. We've been doing that for quite some time. We'll continue to do it. And it's not a partisan thing either. Anybody who would like to come, whether you're a Democrat legislator, a county commissioner, mayor, they're all invited to these reforms. We don't just, Ryan and I can invite a bunch of Democrat, Republican delegates to one of these things, and they'll clap and cheer for us, and we'll feel good about what we did. But you're not going to get any new ideas there. So we're interested in hearing about the new ideas, not just political speeches. I think they're all published in very...
I think we have a TwinWest one on Wednesday we'd love to have you at.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a
Maybe
question.
don't tell them that now, because they may not come then.
So let's move on to another yellow. That might have been a red card, actually.
I'm sorry. No,
So Representative Winkler, one of the questions we have, in our business ballot that we had last month, I think one of the numbers on that were actually quite frightening. Let's start with the good news. Only 2% said they're cutting jobs and cutting investments. So that's good. So, there's a leveling off. We want this slope to go up here. So we had 47% of respondents say that they're cautiously considering adding jobs and or making investments. So clearly there's just this kind of uncertainty. So they're not saying that they don't have the ability to do that financially, but they're cautiously considering it. What can the legislature do, or what can government more broadly do to kind of push them over that? What are they scared of? What are you hearing when you're out talking to folks?
Well, I can tell you that there are two, from my perspective in the business world and from talking to a lot of business owners, the number one thing that people are uncertain about is orders, customers, revenue. They don't know if it's coming or not. They don't know what the economy is going to do. And there is really only so much that the state of Minnesota can do to affect the Greek debt crisis. Although maybe that can be part of 2.0, I'm not sure.
That's 3.0.
3.0, that'll be amazing. But There's only so much that we can do in the state to affect the global economy. And I think that overall global demand, and we are very integrated in the state, nationally and internationally, I think there's only so much we can do to affect demand. Businesses need orders and revenue in order to invest in jobs. There's no question about that. What we can do in the state is help a little bit on creating some additional demand. And one of the things that is really going to be a long-term problem for the state, and I think we're really seeing it right now, is the erosion of middle-class purchasing power. This has been going on for decades. It was accelerated during the Great Recession. I don't know what exactly the long-term solution to that is. The working people basically are just in a different position now than they were in the industrial era. And one of the things, however, that the state can do in the medium term is to increase middle-class purchasing power by supporting the middle class through pathways to training and certificates for jobs. So not everyone's going to college, but we can reinvent high school. We can reinvent higher education so that people actually get trained for jobs that are in the pipeline coming to the state. We can make college access more affordable. We can make sure that homeowners aren't paying higher property taxes through the market value homestead credit elimination. You knew that was coming. By making sure that state policy is oriented around helping the middle class stay middle class rather than favoring the top 2% of income earners in the state. That's going to help the economy grow more broadly. And I have this helpful little article in here from the International Monetary Fund, you know, that radical left-wing conspiracy group, which talks about the fact that over time inequality hurts economies. It makes growth happen more slowly. So we need to focus on a strong middle class for a strong economy. That should be the policy test that we have in the state. And whether we can do something in the short run to nudge businesses, I mean, we could pass a bonding bill, which would put construction workers to work and would have a spillover, a multiplier effect in other kind of private sector jobs. That would help, but it's not a lot in the scope of the state economy. We could, I mean, this is radical, but it would spend more money. We could raise the taxes on the rich and give that money out to people who are middle or lower income who would spend all that money right away in the economy. Now, I'm not sure there's a bipartisan consensus to do that, but an economist would tell you that if you put more money in the hands of people who don't have much, it comes back into the economy more quickly right now. That would have a stimulative effect. But besides that, there isn't a lot the state can do to push demand right now, and demand is really what's holding back business.
What are you hearing when you're out on 2.0 from businesses? You know, why are 47%? So that's a microcosm of this community, but this is a community that typically does pretty well. So you think maybe in other places that number is perhaps higher. So what do you think? Why are businesses holding back, and what can be done, and what are your thoughts on that?
Sure, and I will actually read the same thing. So Ryan and I are nerds in finance and commerce because we're the only two people in the room that probably actually read this when it actually came out. But I do agree with you. There isn't a lot that government is going to be able to do. All of a sudden, like I said, the government reform 2.0, there's not going to be a single silver bullet when we pull away this regulation or that rule or that permit. All of a sudden, businesses across the state are going to think, oh, thank God, now I can expand. And, you know, quite honestly, to your point, Danette, I had the chance to go to the National Speakers Conference earlier this summer, and I asked the same question: what do you hear from business owners in your state? And to Ryan's point exactly, it's fear. It's uncertainty. It's not, we're not ready. There's tons and tons of capital out there. There are a lot of businesses sitting on a lot of cash. Maybe some of you in this room, if you have a chance to spend, please do. We could use the help. There's a forecast coming up in November. Yeah, no. But what they've heard is that they're uncertain as to what either their state government or especially the federal government's going to do when it comes to some new regulation, what the cost for the national health care, whether you call it Obamacare or the new national health care model, and then also and this is something that did come through in southern states and northeastern states, the EPA regulations, what's going to be put into law is one thing, but what they're going to do either by executive order or by function in the agency is scaring the life out of Minnesota businesses, but business owners across the state when it comes to expansion. They don't know what it's going to cost them to build a building. And you all know in this room, you don't just go out and decide, oh, well, we're going to build a new building, and next month you pour some footings, and all of a sudden there's a new building there. It takes some time. So if they start the process, what happens to them during the process where it's actually going to raise the price? So there's a lot of capital all across the country sitting and waiting. And if one business owner said, if you guys could just not do stuff for a while, and I mean you Democrats and you Republicans, just don't do anything for a while. Stay away from Washington's, stay away from your local capitals, and don't do anything that's going to add to that burden. And some of the mandates maybe actually we'd be in favor of repealing, but because it's something new that we're now going to have to either send lawyers out and look at. No offense to Ryan, and there's always good lawyers and then bad lawyers. Ryan's a good lawyer. You look at the cost that it's going to take for them to review those new policies, and it adds another, whether it's 60 days or 30 days, to that process. They've now expended some of that capital they could have used either for an expansion or for a new sales route on lawyer fees to find out what the government has changed now that was different, 6 months ago or a year. So it's probably the one thing I hear the most often and heard from my colleagues all across the country that were at this event, but also then that they were looking from a state standpoint, and whatever the federal government has promised them, it's kind of like the special education funding. Nobody believes that the federal government is going to live up to any or all of the obligations that they're promising the states. They may be able to partially fund us, I think it's 13 or 14% is what our special education dollars were promised, 40, and I think we've gotten, Senator Bonoff would probably know, it's probably like 13 or 14% is the highest we've ever received from the federal government. That's the model that a lot of states are looking at as to what they're going to get from the federal government.
Let's talk about tax reform. So I think I read your handouts last night. I went through them all. And I think, no, actually, I was a history major too. I kind of enjoy the details. But, what was really interesting, look, and I've heard Gillespie talk about this. I mean, we really do have a tsunami coming at us when you look at our tax structure was set up for an economy that was built on products and manufacturing, not service. It was built on income tax revenue, and the baby boomers who are retiring, we're not going to have that. So, what do we need to look at from tax reform, and can we get past, why is tax reform so hard? I think I'm looking right at Senator Bottom when I say that, but, we've been talking about this for a long time, but it really seems to be something that's really hard. You say, well, you can't do it in a good economy, or you certainly can't do it in a bad economy. So what do we need on tax reform, and how do we move that forward?
Well, from my perspective, we don't lack good ideas about what to do in tax reform, and there are, you could expand the sales tax, you could reduce the corporate income tax, you could flatten rates, you could limit exemptions, you can do all sorts of really good things in tax reform, which I strongly advocate. In fact, we don't have to have a battle over how big the budget should be. We could actually do this without raising any new money for the state, and it would move us forward. It would actually be very helpful. I actually think business would be benefited if we made the tax code simpler and more of an even playing field, and where business taxes were based on simple, broad-based policies rather than policies that are chewed up by businesses that are really good at lobbying at the Capitol. We have a lot of that in our tax code. And we could do that if we had the will to do it. The reason I would say we don't have the will to do it is that we have been told that if you raise the sales tax in order to pay for a corresponding decrease in the corporate income tax, which is the recommendation of Governor Pawlenty's Tax Reform Commission, if you do that, you're raising taxes. And therefore, it's completely off the table from the Republican side. And I think that is really holding us back. Now, I will also say that on the Democratic side, there is a real desire not to deal with tax reform unless we can grow the larger pie, unless we can actually raise the amount of revenue coming into the state to deal with a lot of our priorities that we have. So there's a big hang-up on both sides. And it's kind of this, I feel like we're not going to do anything on taxes until Republicans control the whole government or Democrats control the whole government. And I'm going to guess that none of you want us to make tax policy when we control everything. I'm going to guess that most of you would rather that we actually found common ground, put ideology aside, and actually tried to make the tax code reflect our current economy and reflect the needs, the revenue needs, the long-term revenue needs of the state, and actually bring us back into balance. I think that's what people would want us to do. I think we could do it, Mr. Speaker. I really think we could do it. if we would just be willing to step outside, maybe actually not spend time with business. It's good to listen to people, but they actually want us to work together and get something done. From their point of view, the problem is the legislature. It's not government, it's the legislature right now. And if we could actually spend some time, get together in a room, maybe out of the bright lights of the Capitol, and say, this is on the table, this is off the table, this is on the table, this is off the table. We did that on election reform. I worked with Representative Kiffmeyer and Senator Rest and Senator Gerlach. We actually passed election reform in an election year, which is really hard to do because we spent a year working together on it. I think we could do that, but we have to roll up our sleeves and be willing to come out of our trenches in order to do it.
So, Representative Zeller, if we looked at tax reform in a revenue neutral environment, so that Representative Winkler was able to hold back the Democrats who said we're not doing this unless we end up with a bigger pie. Is that something, do you think, that in 2012 there could be some consensus on?
Well, and absolutely, and I'm not sure what you've done to Ryan, to Representative Winkler, but he's so amenable and cordial, and if any of you have watched his floor speeches, there's just a little difference. I'm proud of you. It's coming out of your shell moment here. But, and somebody
Yellow
who spent...
card. No.
Yeah. No, I was genuine. It's actually, this is great. I've had this all the time. And actually, Representative Simon and Senator Rest and Senator Bonoff, we do work, and Representative Carlson as well. We do work well on a lot of these things. I mean, these aren't, again, because nobody else is going to read the Finance and Commerce report on equality and efficiencies but us. The problem, Ryan's exactly right, though, in that one person, one businesswoman's tax exemption is somebody else's tax increase. And until you've leveled that out, one of the ways is actually static versus dynamic scoring. So if you reduce the business tax rate, you actually help the lower and middle income employees in a company. That's a good policy. But the way we do budgeting at the Capitol, that has to show up as a loss, because those wages are going to, the CEOs may or may not actually, take that as a new payment or increase on their income. They might actually put it back into the business. Now, if that's new development, if it's actually higher employees, maybe it's giving the lower employee an increase in their pay, or middle management an increase in their pay. That will go back into the economy on the other side. But in government, we're only allowed to look at half of the spreadsheet. That's a way, I think, that if we were to start the reform, to look at that from a dynamic scoring, and Senator Bonoff is not sure about dynamic versus static scoring, but it is a way to look at the spreadsheet. Because if you look at it from one side only, you're right. We're not going to get to that point where, yes, raising sales taxes may be a more user-friendly system going forward as the baby boomers retire and we become a service industry versus manufacturing economy. It may be good policy, but it also is hardest on those at the bottom of the income scale when you raise sales taxes. So it's not just about philosophy, it's also about how that lower to middle income, especially in Minnesota, how they're able to afford a sales tax increase versus an income tax increase, because they may or may not be paying any income taxes with their deductions and with the tax credits that they receive. So if you're not going to see a corollary reduction over here in your income taxes, but your sales taxes are going up, has it really helped you from an economic standpoint in the middle class? And thank you for Ryan for being concerned about those of us in the middle class.
So we only have a couple minutes left. So I'm going to ask you if you could just both, and maybe you're not prepared to say this definitively, but just speak to, from your caucus's standpoint, what do you think your top reform issue will be in 2012?
Well, I mean, that's a very hard thing for one member to predict about 61 others. But for Democrats, I think the top issue is going to, and we're going to face a budget deficit again. We're going to have another shortfall this legislative session to deal with, because the forecast is going to be a lot worse. And from our point of view, our top reform issue is going to be putting soundness back in the state's books, and that is going to have to include some new revenue coming in. And that is going to be a recurring issue. But if you want to look at reform, it's How do we align our expenses and our income? And we have not done that for 10 years in the state. And we have to get a handle on that, or our books are going to continue to be a worse and worse mess over time. So that will be our top reform, in my opinion, is going to be dealing with the state's finances and getting that back on track.
Speaker Zellers?
Sure, and from our perspective, again, it is the mandates that we're putting on from the federal government, from the state government onto local government, school districts, business owners. We're going to, and for right now, there may not be, again, one or two that will be the top priorities, but I would say in a blanket or a broad stroke, and if you think speaking for 61 is hard, try the other 71 in our caucus. They have gavels and they vote. From our perspective, though, it's that mandate relief, whether it's business, whether it's local government, whether it's schools, that mandate relief. If we're not going to be able to help you, and to Ryan's point, you know, as someone who works in business and understands the functions of an LLC, an LLP, or an S corp, that's where we're going to be going. It's not taxing really rich people, it's taxing small business owners. Now, if it's 1, if it's 100, if it's 5 people, they make a decision on their business because of tax policy to leave the state or to not hire, that's bad for our state. So it's not just we need to raise taxes on a group of innocuous people that nobody knows and we don't care about. It's not going to help our state. When all of our surrounding neighbors aren't raising taxes, aren't going after small business owners in their state, and we do, it's not hard to think where they're maybe going to go. We're not going to try to make ourselves uncompetitive. So, and for those of you who are business owners in the room, thank you for providing jobs in our state. That's not just from the Republicans, it's from the Democrats, from the legislature as a whole. We really appreciate the hard work, the innovation, and the creativity that you bring to our state. So our focus is going to be, and again, we're going to hear a lot of that by going out and listening to folks all across the state.
Well, I want to thank both of you for being here. We are so fortunate at TwinWest to have such engaged legislative leaders, so thank you very much for being here with us this morning. You know, I think actually we could probably resolve a lot of this if we just brought together all of our TwinWest legislators and sat them together. I think we could maybe get this all taken care of. So let's think about that. But if this topic has gotten you interested and wants to get you want to be more involved in sharing your ideas for reform in Minnesota. We talked about this, but we are having October 19th at our Government Affairs Committee meeting. We are going to have Representative Sarah Anderson and Representative Connie Depke are going to join us to listen to our ideas from TwinWest. So I invite you to come at that. It is early. It's 7:30 in the morning, but hey, you got here at 7:30, right? So it's at the TwinWest offices. You can go ahead and call TwinWest, and we'll just scrunch in more chairs in that room if we need to. And you also will not want to miss our November 11th legislative breakfast program. We're going to hear from state legislators and stakeholders on healthcare reform. I might want to miss that one, and how it's impacting the business community now and in the future. So anyway, thank you again so much to our sponsors, Grand Casino, Mille Lacs, and Hinckley. Thank you very much. And also Comcast, Home Service Plus, Swank Audiovisual. So everybody, that concludes our program. Have a fabulous weekend. Thanks, everyone.